Hey, Media People podcast listeners. If you enjoy the podcast, then you're going to love our newsletter, appropriately named the Media People Newsletter. Delivered right to your inbox, each edition is a mix of original and curated content designed to feed your curiosity while aiding in personal development. On top of more podcasts, we'll connect you with articles, interviews, and industry events. Subscribe at mediapeople.ca/newsletter or go to mediapeople.beehive.com. That's BEEHIIV. Thanks for listening to the Media People podcast, lively and insightful chats with the people who power the media industry. I'm your host, Victor Genova. For more episodes, you can go to mediapeople.ca or subscribe wherever you get podcasts, including youtube.com/@mediapeoplepodcast. Views expressed by participants are personal. What does a strategy director do at a creative agency? According to VML's Rory Petty, you figure things out. This includes everything from writing the creative brief to consulting with the client marketing team, with any number of things in between. Creative is actually a recent move for Rory. His advertising career started in broadcast media at Carat's London office. He took a role as a planning account manager at Mediavest before relocating to Toronto. Rory Petty stops by to chat about growing up in a village outside of London, how studying the human side of geography prepared him for a career in advertising, how the advertising industry in London differs from Toronto, and his move from media to creative.
VML is one of the world's largest creative companies, and it's actually quite new. It was created within the last year when Wunderman Thompson and Taxi merged in Canada. Now the country's actually with VML Y&R, and kind of this exciting place where there's lots of brand experience work, which I'm involved in, going on. There's customer experience work that we do. We do commerce work, and it's that full cocktail of things going on so that we can try and give our clients the best possible advertising solutions that we can offer. You know, I'm the strategy director there, so I work in a team. I always say that strategy is a team sport, and I'm surrounded by great people around me. And, you know, so this great post on LinkedIn recently that said, strategy is all about figuring out what the big thing is for our client, and then keep folks internally focused on that. The big thing might be, I don't know, a huge problem they've got. It might be a huge problem they've got that they don't know about, or it might be a huge problem they've got that they do know about. And our job is to then try and move them towards fixing that problem. And I know we'll get into this as we talk, but you know, I love the variety of things that I get to do within strategy in a creative shop. You know, I'm doing creative briefs. I'm leading discovery processes and brand purpose, brand framework documents. I'm doing off-brief ideas and bringing my media background with comms planning and things like that.
Rory, thanks for stopping by today. As always, we're going to start from the beginning. I detect a hint of an accent. It doesn't sound like you're from the neighborhood originally. So where are you from?
Yeah, I'm from England. I'm from a small village just outside London called Holmer Green, which I don't think anyone will have heard of on this in your audience, but it's close to a town called High Wycombe. And I mean, High Wycombe's claim to fame this year is that they're going to be playing Wrexham in the same football league.
In League One?
So, yeah, League One, exactly. We're already behind them in the table. So well done, Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah, I think Wrexham right now, I just checked out the table the other day. I think they're 6th or 7th in the table. They're knocking on promotion of the championship. I mean, we're 1 or 2 weekends in, so let's not get ahead of ourselves. But that is a pretty good start for a team that was in the National League 3 years ago?
Yeah, they are motoring, and you know, I'm happy with my team staying where they are. They're not going up. I'm okay with that, but as long as they don't go down, I'm okay with that too.
You know, it's funny. I asked some of and I might have asked you this as well too. It was, I actually, it was people living over here because I did spend some time in the UK as well. But I was asking some of my friends here who are very hardcore football or soccer fans, would you rather play for a Major League Soccer team or for a team in, say, the Championship or League One that is guaranteed to not be promoted or relegated, so your status is consistent? Who would you rather play for?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, as a sort of I am a football fan, but I'm not a hardcore ultra. I think I might prefer, you know, living and breathing in North America. It's just slightly calmer when you're, you know, going around your normal life as a sports professional here than perhaps it might be in a raucous English city.
Why do you describe your life growing up in England as both idyllic and annoying?
Um, well, that's because I grew up in a village, which was idyllic. It was down a country lane. There were green fields around my house, and foxes were nearby, and badgers, and lots of wildlife and things like that. It was absolutely beautiful, and we could, sneak into the backfield and play some sports there with my sister when I was a kid. That was the idyllic part. But the annoying part was the fact that as I got older, probably more when I entered my teenage years, I was very itchy to be in and around a city with all of the culture and people and the quirks and the good things that come from being in a city. And it was just really hard to get access to that, despite being tantalizingly close to London. So I definitely appreciate it now. But yeah, I've lived in cities now ever since I left that village.
Help us understand what the definition of a village is in the United Kingdom, because we don't really use the term in Canada, the United States, as village anymore. Like I can't think of any villages, but when you do, is you go back 100 to maybe 100, 150 years, very small setting, incredibly rural. But what was the actual legal definition of a village, or what separated it from like a town or a city?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess it's just got a few small but essential services, and the essential services you'll find in a typical British village would be, it might be a baker, a newsagent, most importantly, a pub, I think, and probably like a small primary school, a sort of elementary school or something like that. And it's a small population, somewhere in the hundreds at the most, 1 or 2 thousand people.
And you mentioned that you were itching to get out and you spent your whole life there. And when you got out, when you turned 18, you definitely saw the world. How many places did you live in the next 10 years?
I think I moved every year on average to a different place. I was a pinball.
What was the first place you left your village for?
It was a very interesting year abroad where I went to Vietnam and taught English as a second language there. So from a relatively sheltered village, I was then living in, I think, Vietnam's third largest city. And I was teaching in a university there, which was an incredible experience. And it gave me everything I wanted, a bit of independence and the buzz of a city. And I've always been intrigued and excited by different ways of living, and I definitely got all of that.
I always ask people what their interests or hobbies were growing up. And I think I've got a lot of interesting things in here that we're going to go through. But the first thing my eyes go to is you were on the B team for chess. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, my high school, we had a chess team, but we barely had enough people to fill even an A team, let alone a space team, not a in air quotes team.
Funny, yeah. I was definitely not the first name on the team sheet, but we would tour around other, it's called a middle school. I guess that's like a junior school here, I think, when we were about 10, 11, 12. And we would go and play chess tournaments. And one of the big attractions of that was that you then got to have whatever snacks you wanted after your game was finished. I remember loving my roast chicken chips that I would have after that. But yeah, it was something that we just got into. We played it in the library at lunchtimes. I think on days when it was too bad to go outside and play football or soccer. And yeah, kind of it's one of those things I did as a kid that at some point I'm going to re-nurture it and bring it back as an adult. I think try and get back into it.
You were also a cricketer, and this is what I learned from living in the United Kingdom. You're kind of grouped into three, I guess, sort of three sections. There are the test cricketers, then there's also the one day international cricketers, and those kind of seem close together. And then there's the 2020 cricketers, which I've heard is very sacrilegious. So, what type of cricket did you play or prefer?
I played the short fast game. We'd play that with a garbage bin as the wicket, and we'd play with a bat and a tennis ball at lunchtime, and that was a lot of fun. But I also remember one summer where me and a couple of friends, we just recreated Test match cricket, which is the long 5-day form of the game, and we would just play and play and play all day long, almost from dawn till dusk. And yeah, that was an epic summer of cricket. So I'm a bit of a fan of all forms of the game.
And you're also a cyclist.
Yeah, that was part of the idyllic part of where I grew up was green rolling hills, relatively quiet country lanes. So and again, having a bicycle was my form of independence and moving around. And Um, Having learnt to ride a bike at 4, I made the most of it and got around as much as I could, and quite like the with some steep hills. I quite like the adrenaline buzz of shooting down them fast, and got to go on holiday to France a couple of times as a kid as well. And certainly, I went slowly up the Alps and I went very fast down the Alps, which I loved.
Did you ever try mountain biking by any chance? A little bit of off-road biking because the hills are perfect for that.
I did try it once, and I know you're meant to go fast to, make the jumps and things. I did it as slowly as I could without falling off, and I think I completely defied the point of that sport. It wasn't quite made for me. I do like my tarmac on my bicycle tires.
I ask people who their influences are, and every episode it usually comes back to a family member. Sometimes it's a figure in pop culture. I think once Madonna was thrown around by one of my guests, but you here have nominated Prince, His Royal Badness. So why him?
I kind of got into Prince in my like mid to late teenage years, and this is when he was very uncool, and his renaissance hadn't happened. But there was just something about him that I connected with. His his work kind of went from the sacred to the profane, and I like that sort of range he had. I loved his music. I loved how he thought about everything to do with his how he appeared in the world, from his clothing to his videos to making one great film and I think two shocking films. Um, and yeah, just his reinvention, and I don't know, something about him just connected with me. And I do look at what he made, and he did things in a sort of a bulldozer way, which I think unfortunately a lot of great people do. But it still inspires me, and I still love listening to his music. And I've got a 19-minute live version of Purple Rain on Spotify that I listen to when I just need to get into the zone and do some creative strategy or some deep thinking. It just always gets me into the right flow state. So I don't know, there's something about him.
Let's go crazy. Let's get nuts. Let's slip on the purple banana till they put us in the truck. Let's go. Love that song. Have you ever seen the Kevin Smith story? It's on one of his DVDs, An Evening with Kevin Smith, where he tells a story to a university crowd about how he was hired by Prince to shoot a documentary about religion that has never seen the light of day.
I haven't heard that story, but I need to look it up now.
I will find it and I will send it to you because someone has definitely put it up on YouTube. And to make a very long story short, Prince saw Dogma,
Hmm.
got a different religious message from it. Because even in the video, Kevin Smith is like, he's talking about Dogma, he's got the characters right, but it doesn't sound like the movie I made. And then he brings him out to Paisley Park in Minnesota to make a documentary about religion. And it's an incredible story. And apparently Prince routinely would record songs, make music videos, and they would get put into a vault. Like he talks about a conversation he had with one of his producers, and she was just telling him, like, we've already cut the film. Thanks for directing it, but no one's ever going to see it. And when you
Oh
said
yeah,
he wasn't cool, was that during the time when he had become the artist formerly known as, or he was just the symbol? Like, what was his
yeah,
uncool period?
yeah. That was like the late '90s, I think. That was when he was the symbol. He'd retreated from the big record labels, and and the thing about him, you're mentioning the songs that he's got in the vault. He seemed to have this sort of stream of, I don't know, songwriting ability within him that he couldn't turn off, and he had to write and record a song on a daily basis. So, and that's one of the few good things to have happened from him dying so young, that music is all starting to come out, and you're getting deep cuts of his records, off cuts, things that he cast away, alternative versions of some of his famous songs. They're all coming out, which wouldn't have happened when he was around, because he was such a control freak, because he was so in charge of his own product. So, yeah, silver lining.
It's funny that you mentioned that he was always writing because there is a part in that story where Kevin Smith walks into one of the bathrooms at Paisley Park, and there's a sign letting him know that not only is the bathroom wired for sound, but every other room is wired for sound in the building. So basically, Prince could record wherever he wanted to.
I love it. Thank God
Yeah.
we've got phones now, so we can capture our ideas instantly. I have a pen and paper by my bed just in case that strategic thought comes to me as I'm nodding off. I have scribbled down a few things. Then,
You don't want it to fall out of your ear.
no wait.
Your first job was washing cars. And it doesn't sound like it was a typical car wash. So what were you doing and where?
So I was washing cars on my little lane in England. Well, it's a country lane. There were, I think, 30 or 40 houses down it. And, I wanted a bit more pocket money. And I think I probably did the first route of asking my parents for more pocket money. And they said no. But they said, have you thought about asking our neighbours if they'd like their cars washed? So that was the business I got into, which meant an icy cold bucket of water, a sponge and some soap, and politely asking my neighbours if I could wash their car for, I think, £5 was my going rate. And bless them, some of them actually said yes, and I made some extra pocket money doing that.
And you were also a paper boy.
Yep, that was my first media job. It's sort of a rites of passage job, and I did that every Friday afternoon after school, and I had to. I think every week there were different flyers, and I had to sort the flyers into each newspaper. It's a little bit time consuming, but again, good honest money for a 13-year-old to make.
Did you ever have anyone chase you if there was a flyer missing from that? Because when I was a paper boy and I did that, and they would think that you were neglecting them, even though you had to kind of gently tell them, not all flyers appear every week. Did you have that issue
So
too?
I never had that issue. I had a few dogs chase me, I think, but
I had that too.
isn't it funny though how then people were clamoring for the flyer? They wanted that deal, and it sort of changed a little bit. Now it's sort of, for me, it's almost instant recycling. I will have a look through them, but it'd be pretty special to have me take a read.
Was it a paid newspaper or was it a free newspaper?
This was a free newspaper. It's called I think it was the Wickham Star, and it was every Friday it came out.
You didn't have to go out and collect.
No, I didn't. That was that would have been even more entrepreneurial. That would have been good actually, having to try and learn that, I guess.
Why did you attend the University of Birmingham, and why did you choose to study geography? And what type of geography did you study? Because a lot of people think geography and the first thing their mind goes to is maps, but that wasn't
Hmm.
the case with you.
No, I'll answer the geography bit first. I was really interested in things like politics and economics, and how the world is organized for human beings. And um, in hindsight, there is actually a degree called PPE which sort of does that, and I never heard of it, but I did know that within geography you could split it into physical geography like maps and mountains and volcanoes. There's also human geography, which is more that politics and economics and organizing things like that. And that's what I discovered I could do at several universities. And it felt like I'd always loved, staring at a globe. I had a jigsaw puzzle of the world when I was 7, which I loved completing. And I was always fascinated by other bits of the world and how people live growing up. So it just sort of made sense to try and study that. And it felt like a relatively open degree where if I got the degree, it wouldn't restrict me from going into whatever work I ended up going into, which when I went into university, I had no idea what that would be. And the University of Birmingham, I'm very much, you'd say now it's all about the vibe. It's very much about the feel of the university. It's a university about a mile or two from the centre of Birmingham, which is one of the biggest cities in the UK. But it's got this green, leafy feel to it, lots of trees and grass, and it almost feels like a sort of separate space from the city. And looking back, probably made me think a little bit of home, but a direct connection right into the heart of that city.
I want to talk about your jobs after graduation because you didn't make the jump directly into media like a lot of the guests do. And you worked a series of temporary jobs. Let's start first with your time as a law court evidence clerk, not a law court clerk, an evidence clerk. So what did that involve? Like, were you handling things like bloody knives? Like, no, seriously, like, I mean, it sounds
Yeah,
like I'm joking, but that could happen.
yeah. I mean, I was with a temping agency, and the way it worked was they'd tell you on a sort of Thursday or a Friday what they had for the next week, and um, they said, yeah, you'd be displaying evidence on a screen in the courtroom, and they did tell me it was for a financial fraud case. So
Okay.
I realized there would be minimal bloody daggers. But what there was 8,000 different bits of evidence. And it was amazing. It's an amazing job to do, partly because it was really well paid for a temporary job. Also, I got to sit in the courtroom whenever it was live, and the QCs would sort of be presenting evidence or presenting their case, and then say, now we need to look at exhibit 1272, and that was my cue to enter 1272 on my keyboard. Hit enter, up it would pop on the screen for everyone in the courtroom to see, the judge, the jury, everybody. And I had to stay dialed into what they were saying to not let the court case kind of go sideways. But it was really fascinating because I talked to the barristers, I would talk to the defendant, the guy who was on trial, who of course said I didn't do it. And I was there on the day when he got found guilty, and his shoulders slumped forwards. He looked down, and I think he got like a 3 or 4 year prison sentence for the fraud he'd been doing.
Were you even organizing the evidence ahead of time? Like
Thank
like you said,
God.
you had, I was going to say, you thank God, no?
No, yeah, luckily not.
Okay.
That was all I think that was all prosecution and defense who had to do that, and I was literally just bringing it up on the screen.
Was it like an episode of Law and Order? Like you were just sitting there, like right from the start, did you find that you were getting attached to the defense, their argument, or the prosecution? And you're just like, ooh, maybe he really did do it. Maybe he didn't do it. Like, did you find yourself getting into it a little bit too much before hearing the verdict?
The evidence was there was a lot of evidence and it was deep, but there's something about, just looking at someone who I think he was a businessman, and he sort of looks you in the eye and says, yeah, I didn't do it. I don't know why I'm here. There's something compelling about that. And, I thank God that's why we have 12 people in a jury who can sort of wade through that. And I guess they don't get to speak to the defendant the way I did. They more hear his evidence directly in court. But yeah, it was a fascinating experience. And as a temp worker, it was great as well, because if the judge adjourned the case at 2 p.m., we got paid up till 5. So
Oh, nice.
I loved those days.
What about your skills to create an argument? Did you find that you were picking things here and there, just the way the defense or the prosecution would present themselves, the way they would ask questions or interrogate people? Because there's a lot of life lessons you can learn from this, or just like soft skills you can pick up.
Yeah, there would be. I mean, maybe subconsciously I picked a few things up, but maybe not, as deeply as that. I was still sort of finding my way into what I wanted to do. The reason I was doing these temporary jobs after university was because a lot of my friends stayed on for an extra year and were doing things like masters, or they were on 4 year degrees, whereas I did a 3. And I had such a good time with them at university that I wanted to stay and hang out with them. So that's the big reason why I stayed there for another year.
Tell us about your worst temporary job after graduation.
The worst job was, again, I got the call on a Thursday or a Friday for my role next week, and they said, yeah, you've got to go to this company. I think it was a marketing company. Oh, my ears, pricked up. Ooh, I was thinking about that. Yeah, they just need someone in the office for a few days next week. Brilliant. I think my hopes went really upwards at that point. I turned up on the Monday morning to the office, and they introduced me to a few people. They got me a cup of tea, and then they brought me into a big room with a lot of boxes in it. I said, right, Rory, what would be a massive help for us is if you could move these boxes from this room into the other room at the end of the corridor. And I was like, okay, great. And then what? And they said, no, that's what we want you to do. And that's literally what I spent 2 days doing. And oh, it was just the letdown from what I was imagining I might be allowed to do to what it actually turned out to be.
But let's talk about your first full-time job in media. We know your first job in media was your paper route, but your first full-time job was a broadcast executive at Carat. So how did you find the job? How did you even find agency life in general? Because again, you weren't doing a marketing degree. I don't think the concept of a media agency had ever come up in your education. So how did this fall into place?
Yeah, so at my university they had something called a milk round, which is where different employers come around and talk to you about their industry and why you might want to consider it. And someone from, I think, Zenith Optomedia came and gave a talk that I attended. And I remember him saying something like, media is this mixture of creativity and science. And that kind of struck a chord with me because I felt that I was creative in some ways, but not 100%, creative. And I also felt I was relatively analytical and strategic. And I thought, oh, this could be a good balance for me. And so I started researching media agencies, and Carat did an advert in the Guardian. It was the media supplement of the Guardian, and they're looking for graduates. So I applied. I was invited along to the graduate recruitment day, and it was this really intense day. It was 9 to 5, and it was full of interviews, test scenarios, mock negotiations, a brainstorm with a two-way mirror where the sort of recruiters could look at you, and it
Wait,
finished
like a focus group? Like,
Yep,
oh my
yep.
God.
And they had us doing a brainstorm, and they told me after they hired me that they almost didn't hire me because I was leaning back on the sofa with my hands behind my head, and they said you looked really arrogant, but you came up with really good ideas. And sort of said to them, "Oh, I was just trying to get relaxed. I was just trying to, think. I wasn't me trying to be arrogant." But
That's what
it's funny
arrogance
how,
looks like to them?
yeah,
Like
it's
how
funny
many
what
people do they observe and that's what arrogance looks like?
it's interesting how people perceive things, isn't it? And I remember right at the end of the day at 4:30, they did a maths test. It was a 30-minute math test. My brain was just fried at that point, and I sort of said to them, "Is there any chance I could come back and do this tomorrow?" And said, with a smile on their face, they said, "No, because we want to know you can still do maths and add things up at the end of a long, busy day." They had a great strategy to this recruitment day.
Did you think that after you would ask that question, that regardless of how you performed on the math test, you were done? Like you had shown your hand a little bit?
Well, I didn't think so because I did ask it politely, and I'm a big believer in, don't ask, don't get. And over the years, I have learned that when you are looking for a new job, it's partially mostly for the company to interview you and find out about you, but you do also have the opportunity to assess, how does the company operate? What's their vibe like? Do they listen to what you say? Do they respect you? And I guess that was my first little litmus test of Karen. They listened to my question. They politely said no, and I said absolutely no problem. Let's do this math test at 4:30.
The reason I bring that up is that I'll give you an example.
Hmm.
A friend of mine who, and actually someone I used to work with years ago, very senior in the industry, and he was telling me that again, keep in mind we're going back years, way pre-pandemic, that as they'd interview people, if someone brought up, oh, hey, you know what, I really want to work from home 2 to 3 times a week, immediately they were less likely to get hired, regardless of how their performance was in the interview. So that's why I ask whether or not something like that compromised if they said that, or if you were worried that that would compromise your ability to get hired or your candidacy.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, they're going to be excluding talent with that sort of binary approach to how they're hiring there. I do remember before I got onto the grad scheme at Carat, there was another job, I think for maybe a PR agency, and they were recruiting again for interviews. And at the time, I was living in Birmingham, which was about, I don't know, a £40 train ticket away from London. And I just asked them, is there any chance you'd cover my travel costs to come to the interview? Because I was doing temporary jobs and I had no money. And they weren't polite. They actually said, no, we won't cover your costs. Because you asked that, we're now withdrawing your interview at our company. It is so shocking to me, but I'd certainly dodged a bullet.
So you do the math test. Do they tell you how you score, or do you just find out whether or not you get the job?
You had to wait a few weeks actually, and then you finally get the offer letter. I think that's how it came to me, and a suggested start date, and I had to sign the papers. And I think I probably started around 6 weeks after I did the recruitment day.
So take us through what day number one was like for you as a broadcast executive at Carat in London.
So you know how I said I grew up in that village? Um, there was a tube station 3 miles away from my house. It's one of the furthest out tube stations in the outer reaches of, far London, and it's at the top of a hill. My first day was a day in March, and didn't you know it, that March day it snowed. And I don't know if you've heard about British trains and wet weather, but they don't operate so well in it.
Yeah, I know. I've gone through that. Just add water and chaos ensues.
Yep. And so I managed to turn up late to my first day in advertising, which was fun. But luckily, someone else got the same train line as me and vouched that my train was late and that I wasn't just, taking the piss, as we might say, on day one. Um, but it was really organized at Cara. They had this graduate rotation scheme. So over the course of your first 6 months there, you'd get to sample a different department. You get to learn about what makes them tick and why they're successful. And they really rounded you out nicely. And I remember on my first day, as tradition dictated, they took me out for lunch and at the local pub. Um, and yeah, I remember, you know, working on something. I was given some probably some billings to do or something, and I was working on them at 4:55, and my boss just said, "Rory, get out of here. There's going to be plenty of late nights in advertising. When you can, get out of 5."
Nice. That's a good boss, especially on the first day.
Yeah, exactly. There's some really good people there. I think, some of the people there are now running agencies in the UK. I think someone else is the Anna Hickey is the global client president of Wavemaker. But at the time, they were account directors for UK brands, and just a super bunch of people who were, little did I know, were yeah, actually it was a really deep talent pool that I was kind of lucky to fall into.
So what brought you to Mediavest, and what did your role as a planning account manager entail?
So with MediaVest, I got the opportunity to go from a media buyer and turn into a media planner, and that was essentially account management and media strategy, and it was a real increase in the things that I could do. Beyond the buying, it was more getting face time with clients, understanding what their business and brand needs were, and kind of being at the coalface. As a buyer, I hadn't been too close to clients, and I knew that clients were the decision makers, and I wanted to, yeah, just get closer to them. So I got recruited by Matt Prentice, who I think now has a global innovation role at EHD. He was a great boss. He was smart and fun, which is kind of what I always look for in a boss. And yeah, I learned a lot from him. And it's a sharp learning curve for me going from buying into planning. So just a ton of things I didn't know, but luckily Matt had some faith in me that I could do it, and yeah, I stayed there for 3 years in the end.
At what point do you meet your wife, Jess? Because we're going to move continents now, because Mediavest was, can we say, the end of your British media career?
For now,
For,
yes.
for
I
now, for
mean,
now. Okay, for now. Might brings things
never
full
say
circle.
yeah, never
You're,
say never. I'm probably here for forever, but yeah.
but at what point do you meet your wife, Jess? And
Um,
you guys get married, and do you start to have a conversation about moving back to Canada or moving to Canada because she is from Toronto?
it's funny. We met when I was at the end of my time at Carat, and about a month or two later, I started interviewing at Mediavest, which is where my wife Jessica worked. And maybe the gentlemanly thing would have been to, like, talk to her, but Mediavest offered me a job, and I said absolutely, I want to get into planning. And I sort of told Jessica one day, guess what? We're going to work in the same building.
Oh,
And
she didn't even know.
she didn't know.
Did she know you
She
were
was
even like interviewing at all? Like,
She knew I was interviewing there. She just maybe she kind of expected me to have a chat with her about, should I work at the same company as you or not? But I just went for it because I knew I liked the people there, and I knew I wanted to move into planning. So we worked together out of the same office for 6 months, which made commuting really easy, door to door. And then I was there for 3 years, and just moved to a different agency by the time my time at MediaVest came up. But yeah, we met just over 15 years ago, and we moved to Canada 10 years this year.
was that an easy move for you because you had lived in ten? Like, I mean, at the end of your high school career, you had lived in 10 different locations in almost 10 years. So moving to North America or moving to Canada, was that just something very natural for you? Like, I'm trying to say, do you think or did you anticipate you would have the same level of culture shock that you had, say, moving to Vietnam or any other place you've been to?
I mean, it was tricky to move to Canada in some ways. I think, being British and moving to Canada is probably the easiest, immigration I could have done. But it was just surprising in lots of weird, small ways that add up. I still remember going around a grocery store in Canada one of the first times. And my mind couldn't take in the number of choices in the aisles. Looking at the cereal aisles blew my mind. And still to this day, trying to navigate yogurt is hard for me. I buy Greek 2% plain yogurt and I have to sort of look, does it say Greek? Is it saying plain? Is it 2% or 0%? Oh, am I looking at the French or the English? It still mentally taxes me a smidge.
Really? I did find that maybe I found Tesco and Sainsbury's to be incredibly simplistic. Maybe it put my mind at ease when I was there. I never noticed that. I
I
never
think you
noticed that
have
when I was living over there.
I think in North America there's more product range, there's more offerings. You've got five different kinds of shreddies here, for example, whereas like 10 years ago in England there was one or two. And it's also just all the new brand names. It was figuring stuff out. And I remember trying to find a Swede in the supermarket once, and people looked at me funny, like we're in Canada. And eventually someone, oh, he means a rutabaga. They knew that in England you call it a Swede and here you call it a rutabaga. And just little things like that.
You guys make the move to Canada. Do you land at Carat's Toronto office immediately? Or is there a bit of like, I guess you could sort of say bureaucratic immigration holdover until you've got all your papers to work?
So because I lived with Jessica for a year in England, the Canadian government viewed that as a common law relationship, and I got my PR status, permanent residency, secured while I was in England. So we moved here without jobs to go to, but we kind of wanted to do that so that I guess the way you'd refer to it is we were free agents. We were in free agency and we could talk to different people and go where we wanted. So I just started talking to people and building up my network here, and I got introduced to Kevin Keevy, who was a GAD at Carat in those days, and he, as an Australian, I think maybe we bonded a little bit, and yeah, he got me into my first role as associate director at Carat, working on the P&G business.
Did Carat in the United Kingdom, your previous employer, have any hand in this or none whatsoever?
Yeah, none whatsoever, which is fine. I don't. I'm sure he probably checked out my reference from there, which would have been good. But yeah, it was just me and him connecting and having a laugh and sort of aligning on the way that we viewed media and what we wanted to do for our clients.
Was P&G the biggest client you had worked on at that point?
Yeah, I think so. I had worked on things like Diageo in the UK and Disney, but P&G was definitely a big whale for me. It was a couple of years after the London Olympics, and I just remembered all the P&G marketing that they did at those games, which I thought was wonderful. And yeah, it was really exciting to come and work on their brands.
Was it relatively easy to just pick up from where you left off in the United Kingdom? Was it like riding a bike again, or were there these sort of business or cultural differences between the way an agency is run or the way media works here versus in the United Kingdom?
I think 80% of it was an overlap, which was really good. So if any of your listeners are thinking of going to the UK, I think they could definitely do it. A little bit of it is language, like in Canada it's GRPs, in the UK it's TVRs, and a few little things like that. I think big thing I discovered is the difference between the Canadian media market and the UK media market was it felt a bit harder to get through big bold work in Canada, and I didn't really realize why that was until I understood the way that some of the big telcos who run you know broadcast here operate, and it felt like it was just there were fewer players in the media market, so the media owners here were just a little bit less invested in pushing innovation. I found there still is innovation here, don't get me wrong, just not as much as I had experienced in London.
What brought you to Touche, and what did your role as the group account director there entail?
Jeff Berry, who was the general manager of Touche, got in touch with me, and he said, we're looking for a GAD, and your name came across my desk. Would you like to talk? And I've been quietly impressed with the way that Touche were picking up awards for the media innovation they were doing, and how are they doing this? This is what a great Canadian success story. I talked to him and I got to work with him and Kareen and all the other great people there, and um, it was hard to say no to it because of the Canadianness to it. I'd been here 2 years in the country and worked for a Canadian agency that was doing really well in terms of global recognition. That was really hard to say no to.
What client kept you busy there?
I'd say the big two were Kayak, the travel search company, and also Mark's Work Warehouse, which was undergoing a rebrand into being known as Mark's.
What kind of advice do you give to the client when they're undergoing that rebrand? Because Mark's is an interesting one, because I remember my father shopping there years ago just for work clothes. It wasn't anywhere where you thought of style or everyday clothing. It's where you got clothing that would endure the assembly line at a factory.
Yeah, I've heard about the history of Mark's. I mean, they had this vision to reshape their business and change how they operate and change the kind of offering they have. And I think the agency's role was to help them choose that North Star. I think Taxi were leading that, and then it was our job to kind of keep them pointed towards that. I'm sure they'd wobble off course now and then, but really keep that North Star in our minds as this is where we need to head to, and here's what we need to do the same, here's what we need to do differently, and keep everyone honest to that.
Your move to Wavemaker, at this point, you are now the strategy director. Is it safe to say that most of your responsibilities are entrenched in managing people than they are doing, say, some of the day-to-day stuff you might have liked doing or did early on in your career?
Yeah, I think so. It was a lot of status calls and people management and things like that, which keep your finger on the pulse of what's going on in an agency doing that, but potentially less strategy work with that. And yeah, the Wavemaker opportunity was great because they created a net new role for me there, which was wanted to be an agnostic strategy director. I wasn't tied to any particular client, but I was able to work with all of the different teams within Wavemaker and help them out with strategy in whatever form was needed. And that was brilliant because I got things like global training from the head of creativity in Wavemaker London and things like that. And suddenly it was, it's almost like my strategy development was supercharged and accelerated because it was all I was doing. It wasn't just a part of the job, it was, the whole job.
How do you keep things fresh for yourself, though? Because you're working on all of these clients at a very high level. How do you kind of separate yourself from them or separate them so you're not consciously or subconsciously repeating this sort of same strategy for every client over and over again? And how do you stay knowledgeable on top of all of those clients? I mean, I know the easiest thing to do is an internet search and read up on them, but it seems like a difficult thing to do to have so many different clients that you're responsible for as a strategy director and teams to look after as well.
My number one piece of advice to anyone that wants to get into strategy is read. And I love
Mm.
reading. And I read the news every day. I read all sorts of books. I read autobiographies or books by comedians, but also the classics if they appeal to me, and business or strategy books. I kind of have a real hodgepodge on my reading list, and the more you read, the more you can call on it when a particular client brief comes across your desk, and you can kind of go, oh, I think I read something about this, or I have an inkling about it, and just that starting point for me gives me an angle to go after, and I kind of double check if I'm right or not in terms of what I'm thinking. But no, the more you can know about more, the better starting point you've got. And I also believe that, you know, with different clients, they could be in the same sector, but if they're at a different life stage of their product, or there's a different audience they're after, or whatever it is, whatever you come up with, you've got to tailor that to suit them, to make it work for them. Because you're tailoring it, it's then becoming, the strategy is becoming unique for them. Sometimes you can make strategies that could work for any brand, and I'm still learning to this day that, well, how can you try and make it even more personal to the brand so that nobody else could have done it, and then it's even more powerful for that brand when it does come to life.
Okay, Rory, let's bring everything full circle. VML, did you find the role or did the role find you?
I think it's a combination. It was definitely a combination moment. So because I'd been doing this pure strategy role, Wavemaker, for a few years, it was interesting. I was coming up with essentially what are creative strategies within the media agency, and a few people I worked with sort of said to me, "These are really good strategies, or you should consider working at a creative agency." And I was like, almost didn't quite laugh at them, but I took that with a pinch of salt because I've been in media agencies my whole career. But there's one strategy I came up with that got presented to the creative agency, and they loved it. And it kind of got me thinking. And I knew Trent Fulton, who has been a CSO. I think he's at King Ursa right now. And sort of asked him what he thought of a few of the strategies I've come up with. And would they be, welcomed in a creative agency? And he said, absolutely. So I then started, seriously considering the possibility of, my skill set going into a creative shop within the strategy team. And I think I got introduced to Kevin Flynn via Matt Ball, who I'd worked with when I was in Touche, and Matt Ball was at Wunderman Thompson then, or J. Walter Thompson even. And Matt had remembered me because he said some of my media thinking was a little bit different, and it was memorable. So I got to chat with Kevin when he was the CSO at Wunderman Thompson, and we got on really well. And I remember in the interview process, he was asking me things like, "Okay, I like the strategy. Almost deconstruct it for me. Where did the inspiration for it come from? How did you get to this?" He wanted to just really check that I just hadn't stolen it off the internet or something. I think, which fair play. I do the same thing, I think. But he's a really good leader and good CSO, and he was the one that brought me onto the creative side, and I got to work at Wunderman Thompson for, I guess it was a year and a quarter until it merged with Taxi, and we've got this super agency going on now with Wunderman Thompson and Taxi in one shop as VML.
Expand on something a little bit further. How does strategy differ in a creative agency versus a media agency?
Well, I feel that in a media agency, your strategy is, it's really leading to where and when you might be connecting with people. Whereas in a creative agency, it's more about how will you be connecting with them? What will the tone be? What do you want to communicate? And so both of those things working together are critical. If one isn't firing on all cylinders, it's not going to be as effective as it could be. But there's a little bit more of maybe, I guess, being a consultant with clients on the creative side. You might need to sort of troubleshoot things with the business at a higher level, which you might not get the opportunity to do so much on the media side, in my experience.
Rory, this has been a fantastic chat. You ready for rapid fire questions?
Ready as I will be.
All right, the campaign you are most proud of.
I am most proud of something that I did last year for the Legion, which was called the Advertising Blackout. And that was a campaign I cooked up with Ariel Kubi, one of our chief creative officers at VML. And we were talking about the November 11th silence, and how it's a shame that people book meetings for that silence, and maybe it's a shame that you get served an advert during the 11 a.m. silence. And then we kind of said, hang on, wouldn't it be great if we could just do a blackout of advertising for those 2 minutes? And that's what happened. The Legion loved it as a way to pay tribute to Canadian veterans, and it did really well last year. I think it won a couple of awards, and we're doing the 2.0 of it this year. So if you've got any media vendors in the listenership, I would love for them to get in touch with me if they'd like to get involved. It literally just means pausing your advertising for 2 minutes during the November 11th silence.
Rory, if they want to get in touch with you to talk about it, how can they contact you?
Best bet would be add me on LinkedIn, Rory Petty at VML.
Your favorite movie?
I love movies. I could give you a different movie for every mood that I'm in. But I'm going to choose a favorite movie as the movie I would want to watch and repeat the most. If I'm going to watch something again and again, I want to laugh. And I'm unashamed to say my favorite movie is Dumb and Dumber.
I love that film as well. I don't think you could make it today because some of the jokes are incredibly cruel, like what they do with the blind kid and the bird, having the head taped back on and he sells it to him. Like, I don't
Yep.
think that would fly. No pun intended, because the bird
Oh,
is dead. Didn't mean that, but I agree. Like, that is a fantastic film.
oh, it's a classic, and I think it's just one that always makes me smile. And I watched it with people I've loved through my life, so it's got a lot of nostalgia built into it for me.
If Hollywood were to make a movie based on your life story, who would you want to play you?
So I have chosen Paul Rudd to play me because he seems to mix being kind of smart, kind of funny, but he can also do serious, which is, a little bit of me. And you got to love that hair.
My follow-up, if Hollywood were to make this movie based on your life story, what would you call it?
I would call it Never Stop, Never Stopping because that's a silly Andy Samberg film from a few years ago. I'm stealing the title. But people have said that I can be a little bit, relentless and resourceful, and I kind of keep going off that North Star when I want to try and do something. So it's sort of like an inspiring film title for me.
Your favorite book?
I'll choose something serious here. I'm going to choose 1984 by George Orwell, and maybe that's a sort of a book that some people are forced to read at school. Maybe I like it because I wasn't forced to read it at school. But when I finally came to it about 10 years ago, there was just something brilliant about how it captured this world, this like the world that was created in the book. It's so real, so grimy, it's so, touchable almost. It's like you're there, and it's just the drama of the book and what happens to the characters. It's kind of mind blowing and heart wrenching at the same time.
Your favorite song?
Got to go with my 19-minute deep cut of Purple Rain by Prince here.
The best advice you have ever received?
Thinking about my career, I think the best advice I've ever got was from Trent Fulton, who said, "Hey, Rory, you should go work in a creative shop. You'd be well received there." And there was that. Some strategists will often say, imposter syndrome or lack of confidence in terms of our ideas, and I think we can all feel that way sometimes. But having someone senior just say, "Hey, this is great," that's a big deal. So whenever I see good work, I always make sure I say it too. But yeah, Trent's advice definitely gave me a big push.
My signature closing question, if you weren't in media, what would you be doing and why?
If I wasn't in media, I would have loved to have been a pilot because of that love of geography and travel and seeing the world. But I was definitely not a science student, and I don't think the passengers would have loved someone with a C in physics flying their plane. Um, Even though the autopilot helps us out now. And I think my second choice would have been journalism, which I love words and I love constructing arguments and points of view and trying to persuade people. That would have been really interesting. But realistically, I had zero contacts in advertising. I had zero contacts in journalism. It was hard enough to get into advertising, so probably wouldn't have ended up a journalist. I think the realistic answer is I probably would have ended up being a teacher of some kind, maybe in a high school, something like that. I do like sharing education and thoughts. I am quite patient when I do explain things, and as a sort of psychological extrovert, where I get my energy from other people. I think being in a classroom of teenagers, although it sounds kind of scary and daunting, I think it could give you quite a good buzz in terms of trying to shape the next generation whilst they studiously ignore you and make signs behind your back.
And we're going to end it there. Rory, thanks for stopping by.
Thank you, Victor. Really appreciate it. Great to chat.